we gotta talk about my guy, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And no, not because he reportedly chainsawed the head off of a dead whale, which is illegal, and then tied it to the roof of his minivan with a bungee cord and then drove it home 5 miles. Instead, it has to do with him being in the news because Donald Trump has officially picked both him and Tulsi Gabbard to join his presidential transition team. Right in this, of course, after RFK suspended his own presidential bid and endorsed Trump last Friday, with Gabbard then doing the same on Monday. And with Gabbard, you have some trying to make a big deal about it, saying, wasn't she a Democrat? And there, you'd say technically she ran in 2020 as one, but she left the party in 2022. And, since then, she's pretty much embraced just being a full-blown right-winger and also very pro-Putin. Though, I will say she's always had ambiguous political leanings. But, with all this, in theory, now as part of Trump's team, she'll help design policy and pick personnel for his second term, most likely focusing on foreign policy, her signature issue. And as for RFK, the obvious focus for him is public health, food, and drug policy. Which, if you're someone who believes in science, is pretty scary because he's more rabidly anti-vax than even Trump himself. And notably, with this last week, Trump told CNN he probably would appoint RFK to some role in his actual administration, not just his transition team. So, rumors have floated around that he might actually make Kennedy his health secretary, meaning there could be a world where RFK Jr. would oversee the FDA, the CDC, the National Institutes of Health, and 10 other agencies with a combined budget of around $1.5 trillion. So then on Monday, you had Trump clarifying that he hadn't talked with RFK about that specific post, which would be an uphill battle since it requires Senate confirmation. Though he added that RFK, quote, knows a lot about the subject and has been very well received by the party. Which I will say is kind of funny for a few reasons. The first being that as recently as 4 months ago, Trump was painting RFK Jr. as a pro-abortion environmentalist, calling him a radical left lunatic who is far more liberal than anyone running as a Democrat. And in turn, you had RFK Jr. calling Trump a terrible president with absurd and terrifying policies who turned the government over to corporate pirates, discredited the American experiment with self-governance, and systematically supported totalitarian governments around the world. But then again, J.D. Vance called Trump America's Hitler once, and now he's the guy's running mate. But with all of that aside, how this matters for the short term, it's whether and how names like Gabbard and Kennedy are going to impact Trump's electoral prospects come November. And of course there, any answer is going to be speculative, but different people have different opinions. With some in the GOP, like Mike Pence's former chief of staff telling the New York Times, from the convention platform to the transition team, free market, limited government, and social conservatives have been kicked to the curb. Doubling down on big government populists will not energize turnout among traditional conservatives. But even if this turns off some moderate Republicans, it could attract undecided voters, specifically the kind whom the New Republic sums up as voters who pay little attention to politics. Young people, low propensity voters, people disaffected with our institutions, and who also disliked Biden and Trump, with one high-profile figure who arguably fits into this category being the likes of Joe Rogan. He's never been super pumped about either party's candidate, but he recently made this comment, which he later clarified was not an endorsement.
That's politics. They do it on the left, they do it on the right. They gaslight you, they manipulate you, they promote narratives, and the only one who's not doing that is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I am a fan. Yeah, he's the only one that makes sense to me.
Now, with all this, you have some experts noting that since Biden's been replaced by Harris, a number of people who report disliking both candidates, that's declined. So in one way, you have people saying that RFK may not make as much of a difference as before. You also have folks pointing to polls that were taken before RFK dropped out, with this specifically focused on the opinion of Harris and Trump, according to Kennedy voters, with Pew Research finding that 61% were unfavorable toward both, 14% were favorable to Trump and unfavorable to Harris, and 18% were favorable to Harris and unfavorable to Trump. Though there, I think it would be interesting to see how those numbers have changed since RFK endorsed and could possibly have a role in the administration. But also, notably, it turns out that RFK Jr. might have more trouble than he realized getting his name off of ballots. So he could still be siphoning votes away. And that because when RFK suspended his campaign on Friday, he didn't actually suspend it everywhere. Instead, he announced that he would file to remove his name from the ballot in around 10 swing states and urged his supporters to cast a symbolic vote for him everywhere else. But according to NPR, it might be too late for him to actually pull out of Michigan, North Carolina, and Wisconsin, because those states either have laws that prevent him from doing so, have passed their deadlines, or have already started sending out ballots. And with it being believed that RFK might take more votes away from Trump than Harris, you have Democrats seemingly happy about this and Republicans not. With Ted Cruz, for example, posting on X, if blue states are refusing to remove RFK from the ballot after he dropped out, why shouldn't red states refuse to remove Biden from the ballot after he dropped out? The real answer is both should be removed, but Dems keep elevating politics over democracy. Though with this, I should definitely note, Democrats are not responsible for this. Procedural rules that have long been in place, they are. And as I just explained, RFK's late withdrawal from the race in certain states, it runs up against those rules, while Biden simply transferring his delegates to Harris doesn't. That's the news. Those are the facts. And so now I'd love to hear your opinion in the comments down below.